Hey, what's up, YouTube fans? So, the topic for this video, right, is how quote unquote intelligent design does not solve the origin of life, right? Intelligent design advocates, right, will oftentimes bring up, remaining challenges in explaining the origin of life, right? And they will say that this is indicative of quote unquote intelligent design, right? And they will even go so far as to say that evolutionary theory has to explain the origin of life in order to be true. And they will say that a lack of an explanation for the origin of life is the biggest problem for evolutionary theory, right? When in reality, the origin of life is actually beyond the scope of evolutionary theory. Evolutionary theory does not attempt to explain the origin of life, right? Yes, it is true that most explanations of the origin of life incorporate evolutionary processes, right? But for an explanation of something to incorporate evolutionary processes does not in of itself make it a part of the theory of evolution, right? Just like how if someone trying to explain, why did humans evolve the bony nasal protrusion of the skull, one explanation would be it was an adaptation towards breathing, helping with breathing regulation when walking and running on 2 feet. Um, and so that's an explanation that incorporates evolutionary mechanisms, right? Adaptation, right? But that does not in of itself make it a part of evolutionary theory. And so like, oh, if that wasn't the reason why we evolved the bony nasal protrusion and instead it was because it helped us smell better or whatever, then okay, that's it for evolutionary theory. No, that's not actually like a part of evolutionary theory. It's just an explanation for something incorporating evolutionary processes, right? So yes, most origins, most models for the origin of life will incorporate evolutionary processes, right? But that does not in of themselves that does not in of itself make it them a part of evolutionary theory, right? And there really is no reason why we should expect that evolutionary theory must address the origin of life, right? Just as Newton's explanations for the motion of planets did not explain the origin of planets, right? But they didn't have to in order for it to be valid in explaining what they did explain, right? So in any event, part of the hypocrisy that intelligent design advocates will be oblivious to, right, when they make when they make a big thing about how the origin of life isn't solved and that that's a problem for evolutionary theory, what they are oblivious to is that intelligent design also does not have a solution for the origin of life, right? So there are many, many intelligent designers on the planet Earth, right? And yet no one has ever successfully designed a cell from scratch, right? Synthetic life has been made using already existing life, right? But no one has ever designed life from scratch, nor does anyone have any idea how to, right? So, therefore, intelligent design does not solve the origin of life, right? Now, they can say, well, that's because we're humans and God is different because he is all powerful and so he can do anything. But okay, a few things. For one, even if that were true, we have no idea how that would be the case, right? And for another thing, that's not demonstrated experimentally, right? So it's not coming to the same level of scrutiny that they would expect of any other explanation for the origin of life, right? Um, and furthermore, the main part of the origin of life that remains mysterious is the non-statistical aspect of it, right? Because for the statistical aspect of it, we do not at all need a statistically plausible scenario, right? Because we, the observers, right, could only find ourselves somewhere where life came to be, right? And there's no limit to how large the cosmos plausibly could be. We have no idea how large it is in total, right? And so we do not have strong evidence that that there is a statistically plausible scenario for the origin of life, nor that there needs to be, right? Um and so then the main aspects of it that remain mysterious are the physical mechanisms uh, that are not directly related to statistics, right? But just a matter of like, uh, how is it physically possible, right? And intelligent design, right, does not give us a model on that, not just because no human designer has ever successfully designed life, but then also they have no model on what, if any, physical structure would the quote unquote intelligent designer need to have, right? Presumably it wouldn't have to have arms, muscle, bone, wrist, 5 fingers. And when we're talking about cells, when we're talking about molecules, that's not even something that directly could be assembled by arms and hands as we have, right? And they have no model whatsoever for what the physical structure, if any, would be of the intelligent designer. Many of them even say it doesn't have a physical structure, which even all the more not giving us an explanation then for how it works, right? Um, and so there's no explanation then on their part to the degree of scrutiny that they would expect from our explanations, right? Nothing that they can explain how it actually works, nothing that is demonstrated experimentally, right? And so, it makes no sense then, right, when they're saying that this is a big problem for evolutionary theory, not to mention that, as I said, evolutionary theory does not actually need to address the origin of life in order to be true, in order to explain many things, right, and to be the best explanation for what it does explain, right? Um, And so, it's apples and oranges to like say like, oh, until you explain the origin of life, evolutionary theory is invalid. It's like that's no different than if you were to say, Newton's laws of motion for the planets are not valid until they're, without an explanation for the origin of planets. It's like that's a separate matter, right? And so, you don't have to have like, oh, this is the single idea that explains in of itself everything. It's like this idea is the best explanation for what it does explain. It doesn't have to explain everything. There doesn't have to be a single idea that explains everything. Different things can explain different things, right? So, all right, that's all for now. See you guys.